Start recording. And we'll just let everyone
yeah.
in from the waiting room. So, hello everyone. It's great to see everyone popping in from there. We're just going to we're going to give it, as per usual, for those of you who've joined us before, we give it a minute just so the waiting room activity and people joining the waiting room calms down for a second, and then we'll formally get going. But it's great to see all of you coming out tonight. Sacrificing Netherlands versus Austria to taste some whiskey. So that's a commitment. So just while we're waiting for any stragglers, as one person just joined there, the lineup, which you will repeat again before we get tasting, but if anyone likes to get it ready in front of them, we're going to be going Jameson, Glengoyne, Teeling, Kurioshi, and then finishing on the Bowmore. So Brendan Powers straight in the chat there with a hello, everyone. So how are you doing, Brendan? Good to see you.
Good evening. Brendan.
So there's been no activity in the waiting room there for the last second, so we'll get going. So Thomas and Al, thanks for joining me. And everyone else who's joining, thanks very much. As I always say at the start, for those of you who are new to this, my name's Luke. I'm from the Celtic Whiskey Bar and Larder down in Killarney. We're the world's largest collection of Irish whiskey, and we're one of the largest whiskey bars about as well. We've great, fantastic Scotch selection too. We have a great little bar and restaurant, lots of craft beer, bespoke cocktail menu, and we're home to the Irish whiskey experience, where we educate all the sundry about whiskey and how to drink whiskey, which is incredibly straightforward, as you'll see tonight if you haven't drank whiskey before. This is our third or fourth, depending how we count them, in-house tasting. Al, you were on us about 2 weeks ago doing Celtic Cask, and we did a 12-year-old challenge with Julie and Jack last week. So we have an 18-year-old challenge for us tonight. Before we get started, Al, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself for those of you in the chat who don't know, and Thomas, I'll get you to do the same before we go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I've been with the shop since it opened in 2003, so I'm kind of part of the furniture these days. But last 4 years, I've been part-time, so I'm sort of stay-at-home dad as well. But I do a lot of the sort of sensory analysis and tasting notes for the shop. So whiskies like the Celtic Cask range, myself and Ali would choose what barrels are ready at any sort of set point in time and decide which ones are going to get bottled for that range. And then most of the whiskey tasting notes you'd see online would most likely come from me. So that's basically what I do. Obviously, my day-to-day job is a little bit more mundane than just drinking whiskey all the time. There's a lot of e-commerce and just looking after things on the back end of the website, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's what I do.
Marvelous, thanks, Al. And Thomas, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm Thomas. I work in the Celtic Whiskey shop on the floor itself since the end of last November. So I'm actually one of the people who got a job during a pandemic. I formerly worked in the Loop in Dublin Airport, slinging whiskey there. So mostly I'm on the shop floor to aid and sell you good whiskey. We don't sell any bad ones. That's what I always say. Just some are better than others. So yeah, just come on in, say hello, introduce yourself, and I'll be there.
Excellent. And so you're going to talk us through the first one. I think at the start, we're all going to chime in, but you're going to take the lead on the Jameson. Just before, I know people, about 3 or 4 people have joined in since I first said it. So we're going to go over the order again for anyone who missed it. So we're going to go Jameson 18-year-old, Glengoyne, Teeling Renaissance, Kurioshi, and Bowmore. And obviously for everyone listening in, we want, throughout the chat, we want to hear all your thoughts, your questions, your comments, your tasting notes. Keep them coming in. And bear in mind, at the end, we're going to ask you to decide which is the winner. So maybe we'll pick an individual winner and whether the 2 Scotch outweigh the 2 Irish. That'll be an interesting challenge as well. So Thomas, do you want to take us away with the Jameson 18?
Sure. So Jameson 18 is actually a replacement of the Jameson Limited Reserve. So unlike the Jameson Limited Reserve, it has no port aging whatsoever. So it's mostly ex-bourbon and ex-sherry, but then they finish in first fill bourbon. So it kind of rounds out all the sweetness. So we like to pour your first dram. Little bit of history on Jameson. Most people know about it or have been there. So John Jameson himself was actually Scottish, which I know will maybe disgust most of you. I see someone just left, so fair enough. They're actually related to the Haig family through marriage. So if you ever tried Haig, there you go. And 4 of the sons of John Jameson actually went into the business themselves. And so it went down and down in Dublin, in Bow Street. In 1966, they created the Irish Distillers Group with Cork Distillers and John Powers. And in 1976, Bow Street and John's Lane closed. So they all merged and went into Middleton. So with the Jameson 18, they have 2 versions. They have the Jameson 18 you have in front of you. This is 40% ABV. And they also have the Bow Street edition, being the only edition that's actually matured back in Dublin for the last 6 to 9 months of its life. So if you'd like to raise your glass, Sláinte.
Sláinte.
The nose is quite aromatic. I find it quite oaky. There's a touch of spice in there, not too much. It's quite gentle. And it's quite caramelly or
definitely toffee and vanilla.
Yeah.
No, it's an extraordinary nose. I suppose the Jameson Reserve and the older bottling of the 18-year-old, was one of the first premium whiskies that I'd gotten into years ago, and it's one of those ones when you get it's same with like the Middleton Very Rare, when you try them and then the market expands or your knowledge expands, you can kind of forget about your early flings, like the high school sweethearts. But when you go back to it, it's actually a much better nose than I remembered. Do you know if they changed the blend much, or if have you said port went out the window? Was there anything else they changed in terms of the pot still ratio or anything? Do you know?
That was as far as I know. Yeah, they just look at the port aging, so they basically focus on ex-bourbon, ex-sherry. It would have a fair amount of grain, that's for sure, but that always helps with the sweetness. But I always find that it actually really follows through. So if you'd like to have a taste of the palate. It's very smooth. The spice that was on the nose definitely carries through, as well as the toffee and vanilla. It kind of has an old leathery kind of bookshelf. Maybe it's a bit of the oakiness as well in it. But again, still quite gentle. It is at 40%, which is the legal minimum, of course. But yeah, I just find it quite complex as well, which I didn't, I'll admit, the first time I tried it. But following up, I really think it's more complex than I gave it credit for. It's a huge jump up. I mean, if you've ever seen the packaging, they do the whole 9 yards, wooden box, slots in the top. It really is premium packaging, but I do think the liquid actually stands up. Which again, like I said, the first time I tasted it blind, I wasn't too sure. The more I taste it, the more I love it. And I actually think it is worth, I mean, because there's definitely some more older whiskey than 18. I mean, that's only where they're starting, of course. And they have unlimited barrels and limited casks to work with there, of course.
Yeah, no, it's definitely more complex. It's got a lot of those kind of, as you mentioned, the spice, wood flavors, the vanilla. They all kind of really come out on the palate in a really pleasing way. I'm sure you wouldn't be amazed, but one would be amazed how often whiskies we try here. And I think we found this with the Celtic Cast tasting, where the nose can be such a stark difference to what you get then on the finish. Whereas this tends to be really consistent and carry through really well. Kind of accentuates what you get on the nose. What are your own thoughts there, Al, on what we're drinking so far?
Yeah, it's very to me very bourbon like. The oak is quite active, and so it's a nice sort of spicy vanilla and sort of ginger, sort of root ginger sort of things going on as well. But that sort of American oak background. I'm not getting a huge amount of sherry, but yeah, there's maybe some in there. But yeah, very sort of bourbon dominated for me. But kind of like a bourbon whiskey rather than a bourbon cask matured whiskey, if that makes sense to everyone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. And it's interesting what you're dead right in what you're saying about the sherry not being massively present there, or at least obvious, because I wouldn't have thought of that, but now that you mention it, you're 100% right. And that's going to be interesting to compare with the Glengoyne as well, which from my memory of trying that in the past it's quite sherry forward. Although maybe we'll taste it and I'll be wrong, as per usual, as says everyone who regularly does these tastings. We'd love to hear what you guys think in the chat. How do you think, from your both? This is a question for both of you guys in terms of what you might have tasted in the past. How this stocks up to the Bow Street, the cast strength version, and where it slots in at. I think it's about €200. Am I right?
€200, yeah.
So how that works in terms of that price point, in terms of what else you got around it? Like I suppose in that price point you got Bushmills 21 and Middleton Very Rare. What are your thoughts on those two categories or regards?
It's a difficult price range. Yeah, I think there's a wide variation in price versus quality in that bracket, and this is maybe at the higher end of the sort of price for what you get. I think compared to something like Bushmills 21-year-old, which I think is a fantastic whiskey for the money.
For about a $5 or less, I believe, or is it around 195 or
175?
175, so €25 less. Jesus.
Yeah. But you could pay a lot more for a 17, 18-year-old whiskey as well. So there you go. That's the way things are these days. No,
that's true. It's and I think it's probably the mature grain coming through, but it reminds me a lot of the Quebecan 21 when that was knocking around. In terms of some of the softer kind of buttery notes on the end. And in terms of what Al was just saying there, Thomas, do you have any thoughts on how it stacks up?
No, I do think that for the age of liquid that you're getting, I think it's thereabouts price wise. Plus, you have to remember the packaging as well, and there is a small element of you're paying for the name. So a lot of people have had Jameson, a lot of people have Crested, Black Barrel, and such. But when you get up to 18 years plus, there's an age statement there, so that does mean a lot when it comes to people buying. So people see an 18 stamped on it, they want it. Wooden box as well, as I said. So it's more about the display and the wow factor as well. But I think it's one of the most drinkable whiskies out there, for sure.
No, definitely. And as you say, the box is amazing, but the bottle design as well, the stout kind of shape of it, the kind of the way it kind of grooves on, if my memory serves right, it's kind of little grooved as you hold it. It's a really gorgeous.
It also has a medallion as well.
Yeah, it has a lovely medallion that you can take off and wear around as a bracelet or something. We got a few comments coming in the chat there. Adam says, if I did this blind, I'd say it was a bourbon as well. So yeah. Nat Cav says thin, but it's oily. I'm talking about the whiskey, not Al. Which gives it a good body, lightly spiced and oaky. Pretty much, I'm saying that because I'm not thin, Al. It's not that I'm not emphasizing the oily bit there. Pretty much getting exactly what you guys are saying. Oak, toffee, very smooth, quite pleasant overall. So we're off to a good start. Now, I didn't say this at the start because I'm a fool and I always forget what to say at the start. But we were discussing before we came live, and we were saying if it might be an idea if people want to hold back a small bit of the whiskey, that you could maybe try again at the end. And maybe down the line in the other ones we'll add some water, but at 40%, I don't know what you think, guys, but I don't think this needs if it doesn't need a drop of water, I'd say.
I wouldn't.
No. Marvelous. So have we any more thoughts before we move on? I think that's a strong start.
Absolutely.
Stephen Hamilton says, very nice, going down easy. Yep, no need for water. I think it's going down a bit too easy, Stephen. I'm worried that we've powered through the first one, but I'm also conscious that my glass is empty. So,
I think it'd be fair to say no one dislikes this whiskey. Fair.
No, and I suppose that's maybe this is a strange thing to say, but I think maybe that's what Jameson go for. It's just no one dislikes this. It's a real easygoing. It's why they made it their flagship brand, or what they wanted to do with it as their flagship brand was make it an inoffensive presence that wasn't going to, as opposed to Lefroy, who run the tagline, dividing opinions since 18 whatever, so they lead into this idea that it's not for everyone's taste. Mark Boyce, before we move on, says the nose is amazing. Brendan Power says nice one for the hip flask. Yeah, that's very true, although I prefer something a bit more sherried in the hip flask, either smoky or sherried, especially going on cold walks down here in winter. But yeah, maybe one for the summer hip flask. So we might we might leave that there. So, and we can always come back to it as we move along. Al, you were gonna introduce us to the fantastic Glengoyne 18-year-old.
Yeah. So Glengoyne, obviously Scottish, and it's quite an unusual distillery. It kind of straddles the Highland line. So in a way, they probably could have chosen whether they wanted to be a lowland distillery or Highland distillery, but they went for Highlands because that's where the water comes from. But most of it's actually matured across the road in their lowland located warehouses. But it's always been known as an unpeated single malt, certainly in modern times. And way back when I started drinking whiskey in the 1990s, it was kind of aggressively marketed as Scotland's unpeated whiskey, whereas, you know, in reality, most Scottish whiskies are unpeated. It's just the smoky ones seem to get more attention. So this was released, the 18-year-old was released originally in 2012 as a replacement for the 17-year-old, which was highly regarded. It was a big favorite of people like the late Michael Jackson, big whiskey writer, not the singer. So it was one of his favorites. And like all the Glengoyne whiskies, this has a heavy sherry influence. So they don't say it's entirely sherry cask matured, but it's predominantly Oloroso sherry cask with a proportion of first fill bourbon casks, and bottled at 46%. So we might try it without water first and then try maybe adding a drop, but we'll start off by having a good nose. And I immediately surprised when I nosed this earlier. There's a real sort of strong, sort of almost like buttered toast note. Not the kind of classic sherry notes of sort of dried fruits to begin with, but then they come later on, and maybe touches of orange zest in there as well. That sort of mixed citrus peel kind of thing.
No, I definitely get the orange zest.
Yeah, I love to hear what everyone else thinks of the nose. I do get a sort of faint touch of licorice even as well.
No, licorice is a good shout.
But to me, it's almost like, you know, the orange chocolate boiled sweets.
Yeah.
That kind of, I'm getting milk chocolate on that, was it?
You definitely get the chocolate massively comes through. Yeah. Especially once it's opened up a bit in the glass, like, you know. And
I didn't mention the color, but I had a look at it there before we poured it, and it's exactly the same color as the Jameson 18-year-old. So there you go. In the same glasses, you wouldn't be able to tell which one's which. So, well, I couldn't anyway. Maybe I was looking.
Well, I'm not sure. Are they both all naturally colored? Or do we want to touch that subject?
I have a feeling Glengoyne doesn't have coloring, but if they're predominantly sherry cask matured, they probably don't need it, you know.
Mm-hmm. True.
But we'll talk about that a bit more when we're on the Bowmore, maybe, because that's one of the sort of sticking points with Bowmore for some people. But anyway, let's have a taste. Mouthfeel it's a lot bigger than the Jameson in mouth, and there's a kind of a chewier sort of more sort of tannic wood sort of quality for me anyway. I think you notice the alcohol as well, like 46%. You can notice the difference, perhaps. Let us know if you do. But lots of malt flavors. So it's not all sherry cask. That real sort of barley sugar note comes through really nice. Tastes
actually
like
incredible,
like Scottish whiskey, you know, with obviously without the smoke, but yeah, it's got a real sort of barley note, which is lovely.
Those it's kind of like, it's not creamy, but I want to say creamy. Maybe makes sense at the back of the palate. There's something really like sort of like
porridgey, maybe
porridgey. Yeah, I suppose like almost like call it cheesy kind of. I don't know. There's something there that's in a really good way. That's really, really interesting. I'm a massive fan of that now. I must say. What do you
I'm
think?
blown
Thomas?
away by the mouthfeel on that, though. That kind of chewiness. It's it makes it a whiskey that you wouldn't get bored of quickly. Really, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. We got a comment in there saying, I hate to say it, but I think the Scots have gone 1-0 up. Lovely, first time having it.
First time this year.
Yeah, there's definitely
probably not going to happen tomorrow.
Hold on to hope.
Yeah, well, I hope it does happen tomorrow as well. You know what they say, happy wife, happy life. Very soft and creamy on the palate initially, quite floral in this case. Water does liberate its character, so water will be interesting. And that water comment reminds me of. Al, do you know if this is chill filtered?
I don't know for definite, but I'd say it isn't. Given that it's bottled at 46, usually that's a kind of good indicator that it isn't chill filtered. I'm going to add a bit of water to mine anyway and see how it goes.
Yeah, I just had a little bit there, so it's gotten very oily. The water, you can see it up the glass.
And this is 152 as well. So if Aidan say, or is it Brendan has said, hate to say it, but Scots have gone 1-0 up. The price point alone, I think, you know, you have to factor that in. Even if it was a closer race in terms of flavors of whiskey, if you're saving nearly €50, like, I mean, where are you going? You know?
And it still comes in phenomenal packaging as well.
It's a tube, isn't it? Or
no, it's actually in a box and it separates. You know, opens the whiskey, I believe.
Right.
It has a top on it, essentially a square top. You take the square top off and it opens out like that. The new packaging anyway. The old one may have had a tube.
No, I might have been thinking of a younger age statement, Glengoyne as well. Teapot Dram, I know definitely has a tube. I have one of those downstairs. So I'm just probably just thinking of a different one. But that sounds exciting. Aidan says, good to chat with the guys in the shop earlier. So Aidan was in the shop earlier.
I think I remember Aidan, yeah.
Thomas says, a flowery cheddar at the finish. So he's taken up my cheese theme. So thank you for not leaving me out to dry there on that, Thomas.
I'd like to know if people prefer it like full strength or with water. I'm kind of torn between the two, and I love the hot spiciness of it when it's uncut, but there's a little bit more.
A small drop of water. So, yeah.
Without the water, yeah, and then with the water, it's a bit more floral, and I get a bit more of that licorice coming through with the water.
It definitely changes with the water. I prefer it without the water. John Howley in the chat says without the water. Louise says never with water. Mark Boyce says no water. ... So we'll await the continuation of that. Paul says no water, thanks. Siri says no water for me, and Brendan says without. So it's I think unanimous there. Well, probably not in terms of a majority, but it seems to be a lot of passionate anti-water campaigners there. Is it the fluoride? They don't like their whiskey with fluoride, but no, that's interesting. Any I know that one of the whiskey trips to Scotland a few years back visited Glengoyne, and it was a big hit amongst some of the shop's customers and staff that went on that journey. I think they blended their own got to blend their own whiskey in the distillery at the time, and played with some really cool sherry casks. So if anyone is in the area, maybe that's worth checking out. Have we any further thoughts on this, guys?
It's lovely stuff. That's all I've got to say about it.
Yeah, I'm slightly edging it for the Scots.
It is lovely stuff, and I remember, like, I was there, as we were saying before we came out. I was lucky enough to visit Glengoyne about 3 years ago now, and I was surprised by, for such an incredible brand, how little their output was as well. I can't remember now what it is off the top of my head in terms of litres per year, but it was quite small for a name that I think is quite recognisable to people who are interested in whiskey, or maybe that's my own bias in the sense that maybe this isn't as recognisable a brand, but it feels like a big enough brand to have such a small output. So yeah, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, Al, what the output is.
I don't, but I think pretty much everything they make is single malt. You know, they don't put it into blends, as far as I know. I've never heard of any blends that have Glengoyne in them. Anyways. Yeah.
No, fair enough. And is it owned by Ian McLeod? Is it or?
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah. I don't know how long. I think that's a fairly recent thing. I think it used to be a family company, as far as I know. Yeah.
No, I think you're right, but I think they were also the ones that introduced the 18-year-olds to the range. So I believe it's quite a, relatively speaking, a new release to the lineup, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, have either of you, before we move on, tried any of the older age statement Glengoynes? I think we have the 30-year-old in the bar in Clarny, if anyone's interested.
And a 25-year-old.
Yeah, I think I tried the 25.
Phenomenal.
They're all good whiskies, yeah. There's not a bad one amongst the range, so you can't go wrong with Glengoyne.
Definitely. Marvelous. So we're gonna come on to the Teeling next. Thomas, if you want to talk us through the Renaissance 3-year-old, or sorry, it's an 18-year-old Renaissance 3.
Series 3.
Series 3.
Yeah. So the Teeling Renaissance series is essentially a follow-on from the Teeling Revival series, where they had 5 different editions. A lot of collectors, and same to be said for the Renaissance series. So series number 1 was a Madeira finish. Series number 2 was an Australian Shiraz finish. And this one is Muscat wine. So a little bit different from the other 2 for sure. Only 9,000 bottles for this particular one. It tends to do very well in the shop. The price point is 140. So especially for that price, that kind of age statement, you expect the whiskey to let it down a little bit, I suppose, like all smoke and mirrors kind of thing. But when you taste it and you nose it, you realize, no, it actually does stand up. So again, it's standard packaging. It's aged most of its life in ex-bourbon and then moved into those Muscat wine barrels. So it's bottled at 46%. So a lot of people ask when it comes to Teeling, how can they have aged stock? Well, John Teeling, the father of Jack and Stephen, who own and run Teeling Whiskey Distillery, John Teeling, the father, he actually founded Crowley Distillery. And when he sold it, he agreed as part of the deal to have 16,000 casks as part of the deal. Henceforth, they use that for Teeling whiskey. So not all of them, and in different varying editions in their small batch, be it single malt, single grain, and different age statements through. But this one, when you nose it, it's very candy sweet, almost pear drop. Very fruity, mango, pineapple, slightly herbal. Apricot, mango, slightly pineapple as well.
I got excited and took a sip.
Yeah, jumped the gut. It's hard not to, in fairness. It's so inviting, though. Quite gentle as well for 46. But then on the palate, again, very fresh. Citrus, touch of vanilla. Almost like apple, cooked apple. And there's just it's a little prickle on the end. It's not strong. It's not too strong. I'd be interested to try it with water, actually, which I haven't done. So it stays quite zesty on the palate. I'd be interested to see what other people kind of find on the nose and the palate there.
Getting a bit of bubble gum or something like that. The fruitiness is amazing. I think you could milk through a bottle of that in no time.
We have a few comments coming in. Where some pear on the nose. Wow, that's the gentlest so far. That's interesting. I think on the nose, I would agree, but I found it was quite there was quite a lot going on in the mouth. I thought it was a bit stronger alcohol wise until compared to the Glengoyne, just me personally. Noreen says, move over Glengoyne. So there you go. Mark says, Pears is right. Never had a Teeling I didn't like. And Niall says, easily my favorite of the Renaissance series. Muscat finish is fantastic. Lots of tropical fruit in the palate. Tropical fruit is definitely the buzzword for me. Definitely, it really comes through there. And interesting what you're saying about the candied boiled sweets. I think that's definitely present. I know there's a few people who are joining us tonight who would have been on the two Teeling tastings, or at least one of the two we did. We were lucky to have Alex Choscon. We did a whole Brabazon series tasting, and we had an older, I think it was 24 and up age statement Teeling tasting, and they were really, really phenomenal whiskies. And this one doesn't disappoint either. And interesting, at 140 euros, am I right?
It is indeed, yeah.
So we're dropping price points as we go. So
it's usually the opposite.
No, definitely. And we didn't select this running order on price point. I suppose our thinking behind it mostly was what would not dominate the next whiskey, you know, like so that you weren't sort of being thrown off. And I think it's working so far on that front. But it's interesting that having gone that decision, we've also been moving down in price points. What do you think, Al, or any more thoughts?
I really like it, and I think Muscat is such a good partner to Irish whiskey. I think what was the range before Renaissance? Revival. The Muscat Revival was particularly good as well. So obviously they knew it was going to work. But yeah, I think it's fantastic. It kind of passed me by. I didn't really pick up on it much when it came out, because there's so many new Irish whiskies coming on the scene every month. It's easy to sort of miss out and forget about some of them. But I think it's really nice.
Yeah, I think I was put off the Renaissance series from. They seemed very collectible when they first came out, and I just couldn't be dealing with all that drama. You know, I just want a whiskey that I can enjoy hassle-free without drinking it at home, worrying what have I done? Have I given away my child's college fund by opening this bottle? You know, so it's you without being able to a while down the line drink it with some remove is really interesting. Yeah, they've worked a lot with you guys in the shop will know best, a close relationship with Teeling, but they've worked a lot with that kind of fortified wines that buck the trend in terms of not just being your sherries and ports. Obviously, we have Sauterne cask, Muscat. There's a few Marsala ones and a Madeira in there as well, I believe.
Pinot de Chiron, that was a good one.
Yeah, the Pinot de Chiron was very nice. There was a Pinot de Chiron, the Pole Castle as well. Was it that was brilliant as well. But yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that point. I'm just rambling here. But so if someone wants to do some talking.
No, but I will say I added a drop of water and it seemed to mute some of the fruit notes, but raise the sharpness of it. So I think I might prefer it just at full strength.
I think the thing is, at full strength, it's still an easygoing whiskey. I mean, there's a bit of an alcohol burn when you taste it, but that fruitiness just drives it all the way, and I think it's hugely enjoyable at 46%.
No, it really is, and like I always have, like, you know, people have everyone's, it's a game of opinions, and whiskey can be quite subjective, but I don't envy and that isn't just limited to Teeling, but someone like Alex getting these casks at 15, 18, 16, 20 and having to transfer them into these barrels and thinking, oh, how's this going to go? Do you know? It's a job that would stress me out, not just picking the barrels, but when's the right point to end it? I know it's something we touched on when we were talking about the Celtic cask tasting, where was it I can't remember which one it was, Al, you thought had been overaged at the original time when you were bottling it back in 2014 or whatever it was.
I think it was one of the Madeira ones, maybe. Yeah, I can't remember really, but yeah.
But yeah, well, you know well that it's not easy to get these right, you know.
Is Mark mixing his whiskey with Diet Coke, or is he having it on the side?
Yeah, tell us more, Mark. As for anyone who's not reading the chat, Mark says mine is going down well with a Diet Coke. So I mean, the only thing I'm offended about in that comment is Diet Coke. All that aspartame, you don't need that in your life, dude. Like, you know. So there we go. And it's good to see that Cristiano Ronaldo hasn't put him off drinking Coke either.
Have to try it with a Heineken next.
Heineken 0.0.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we'll get Paul Pogba on one of our whiskey chats anytime soon. You
know, I'll dream big.
Any famous footballers that are into their whiskey? There must be a few.
That's a good point. I'm not sure.
I had John Barnes come into the shop I worked in Glasgow when he was that famous failure at Celtic when he was their manager, and he bought every single bottle of Chateau Moussard Lebanese wine we had in the shop, which was a huge amount, but he didn't go anywhere near the whiskey. So,
interesting.
Plenty of wine fans.
But there must
Alex
be.
Ferguson
I'm sure
was well into his wine as well, or still is.
And obviously, there's that iconic Castel Diablo advert from when they sponsored Man United.
Well, Chivas Regal sponsor Man United, I suppose. Chivas Regal have a Man United edition as well. So.
Do they? But there must be footballers who've got casks in Scottish distilleries when you go visit them, and they have, this is our famous person who filled a cask. I once met Robbie Brady in Adair Manor. I don't know if that, Adair Manor have their own single cask Middleton, so there's some sort of a whiskey connection there.
I remember like Michael Owen. Michael Owen has ties with Spey Distillery, Spey, the brand of whiskey. And if look up after this tasting, if anyone wants to laugh, look up Spey Michael Owen on YouTube, and you'll see some adverts, and they're cringeworthy. They're terrible. Terrible.
I can't wait. Brilliant. Well, people in the chat there are looking at me like, for fuck's sake, lads, I can't believe I paid money for this.
Enough of that.
So Noel says, I agree with Thomas. Water just doesn't do much for this. Mark says, don't know about football, but some of the rugby lads do. Jamie Heaslip is doing a job with Dingle at the moment, and obviously, what's that? You man.
Brian O'Driscoll.
Really annoying one. Brian O'Driscoll has a thing with Glendalough. So yeah.
He sold up. He's okay. He's over it now.
Is he out of it? Is he?
He is out of it. Yeah, he made it. Few euro.
I don't know if it's apocryphal, but isn't that why they went with a 13-year-old as their main?
Yeah.
Apparently, yes. And then there's the old thing of St. Kevin. He was in the river for 13 days, 13 nights. So,
so that sounds better than going for number 13. But yeah. Seeing as, and it makes more sense, seeing as they've got St. Kevin on the bottle. So there we go. Maybe in a few years' time we'll be trying a Glendalough 18-year-old in a challenge. But in the meantime, I suppose everyone is waiting for us to come on to the Kuryoshi, which is coming up next. Sean Potts says always take the water with the whiskey, but for once this one was better without. And I agree. I wasn't bad with the whiskey. It definitely changes it. It brought out some interesting, as you said, kind of sharper flavors, more kind of I suppose lighter, kind of almost like a banana-y, kind of fruity, smoothie flavors. But I definitely preferred it without water, as it was bottled. So Al, the Kuryoshi is a new one in our range in Celtic. We started importing and stocking it last year. Do you want to tell us a bit about you were going to introduce us, and then we were all going to talk about it. None of us wanted to. We did the Scotsman and the Irishman, and then we're all going to try and tackle the Japanese.
So yeah, they're kind of one of the new kids on the block in terms of Japanese whiskey, and you might be sort of questioning, well, how come they're releasing an 18-year-old whiskey? And depending on who you ask, it's 100% Japanese but sourced from other distilleries, or it's partly Japanese and partly Scottish. And the kind of curious thing about Japanese whiskey, up until the 1st of April this year, they've been allowed to bottle and label whiskey as Japanese, but actually incorporate some other whiskey in there. So as long as it's actually put together in Japan and it's not labeled as single malt, they can call it pure malt if it's a blend of malt whiskies from around the world. So over the time, you've had sort of Japanese whiskies labeled as pure malt that have had Japanese, Irish, and Scottish whiskey in amongst them. This one's a bit of an enigma. We've been told by some people that it's 100% Japanese. Other people seem pretty assured that it's a mixture of certain Scottish distilleries with Japanese whiskey. Now, we're not told from them what the Japanese component is, but it's certainly not from the Matsui distillery, which is owned by Kuriyashi, because they've only been making whiskey a few years. Up until recently, they only made sake and Japanese spirit called sochu. We are told it's predominantly bourbon cask matured. So I think this one will be interesting to taste, because we're kind of tasting it blind in a way. We don't know a huge amount about what it's made out of. So I'd like to hear your opinions on whether it tastes Japanese or whether it tastes a little bit Scottish. In terms of Scottish distilleries, if there is some liquid in there, it's most likely to be Tomatin or Ben Nevis distilleries. They're the ones with the sort of closest ties to Japan, but we'll have a little sniff anyway and see what we think.
It's got lots of almost like strawberry, kind of vanilla, kind of fruity flavors to the nose, and it's a small bit malty as well. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit grassy in the nose for me as well.
Yeah. Normally with a Japanese whiskey, I just expect a lot of sort of orange oil and a slight sort of exotic hint of something like faint incense or sort of exotic woods like cedarwood. But I'm not getting
oil as well.
Linseed oil, so yeah, a big one in Japanese whiskey, yeah. There's maybe a hint of that now that you've mentioned it.
Well, Sean already has a great comment in so far. He says, opening a Del Monte fruit cup. And Niall says fruit cake on the nose for me. And then Stephen, throw back to our previous conversation about footballers and whiskey. He says, Gascoigne, I've been on a whiskey diet. I lost 3 days. So it's a classic one.
Sounds like a man.
I'm sure if George Best was around today, he'd have his own whiskey. His own Bushmill single cask or something.
Probably.
Another obscure whiskey story about Paul Gascoigne is like my family know some hotel owners in the south of Scotland where he used to hole up when he was at Rangers, and he basically used it as his drinking getaway. He'd go down there, fish for salmon and drink himself stupid over the weekend or the week, and then go back to play football again.
Better than anyone on the team as well.
There's a comment in there that I'm not going to read out.
So yeah, well, we taste it, and
I've jumped the gun and had a taste. It's got a real kind of like orange blossom water kind of tang to the side of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite kind of minty and spicy as well. It's really interesting. It's I know we were talking about the not knowing the provenance of it, and not just, obviously this is not, when we say that, we're not having a go at Kuriyoshi the brand. That's an issue with Japanese whiskey as a whole, and yet still they produce some fantastic whiskies. But it's a really, really drinkable whiskey, I must say.
So kind of like sort of lemon cake, something like that in there, like lemon drizzle cake or something. Regarding the law, actually, that I mentioned on the 1st of April this year, that whole labeling thing has changed now. So they have to kind of reword how they bottle and label these whiskies if they are a blend of Japanese and other whiskies. So I can't remember exactly. Luke and Thomas, is it they can't say Japanese unless it's 100% Japanese? I
believe that's correct. Yeah, they have 18 months to basically settle off what they have at the moment if it doesn't comply.
Yeah.
So okay.
Yeah, Thomas in the chat there says it's much better than 12-year-old. We had a 12-year-old Kuriyoshi in our tasting last week. I mean, I think it is much better than 12-year-old last week, but I suppose it's also an 18-year-old. So, and it's 205 euros. But you're right, Thomas. That 12-year-old, we started with it last week, and it was by no means bad, but it did kind of get brushed aside. I don't think it was many people had it at the end up with their favorite ones. Mark in the chat there says he's not gone on this one. Brendan says wet hay being slapped with brown leather.
Very specific.
That's an interesting one. It's definitely one that lingers with you.
I think
I like it.
it's an enjoyable whiskey, and I think if someone handed me a glass and told me, "Here, try this," I wouldn't place it as Japanese, but I would enjoy it.
I suppose not that it means much. It won Best Japanese at the San Francisco Awards there recently.
Which one did?
We all have a San Francisco award.
The Kuriyoshi 18 won Best Japanese.
Yeah.
I suppose some of these are maybe paid for, but not saying San Francisco.
This is being recorded, you know that.
No, that's what I said. I'm not saying there.
I'm just like say he was speaking in his own capacity there, and not on behalf of Celtic Whiskey in that moment. But,
absolutely not.
Thought it was much nicer with a drop of water. Takes the edge off a bit. I'm going to try that now. Aidan said agreed. It's Scottish heritage shows through very clearly. So that's interesting.
And it's 50% ABV. Sorry, I don't know if that was mentioned.
I don't think it was, but but you can.
We should have mentioned that, really, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
How bad?
I'm looking on the website here, and it's €205. So, like again, as Al says, if you're handed it, you wouldn't be anything but delighted to be drinking such a nice whiskey. But at that price point, I think that does knock it into fourth place. Someone in the chat says fifth place. Currently in fifth place, which is really, really unfair considering we haven't tried the fifth one yet. But yeah, it's.
I think we might go back at the end, and if we have time, try a few side by side and see, because I think some of them would be interested to try again against each other and see where the value lies.
Yeah, no, definitely, and it's difficult because like we've been drinking away here, like we are in our fourth whiskey, and it gets harder and harder to appreciate. The more you go on, I've often said on the chats that I'd love to do a few tastings where the one that we objectively think is the best one, always stick it in the middle and see what comes out. Because towards the end, you kind of, your palate starts playing tricks on you, especially when you're drinking kind of 43, 50, 46, 50% whiskies. But, Judd Kelly in the chat there says, bit of a debate, but at 205, is Redbreast 21 better? That's a bit of a curveball, but
unfair fight, I would say.
Yeah, I know what I'd rather have. Yeah.
But I take for granted what he's saying about other whiskies in that price range and where value can be found, and that's fair enough. I think you could probably say the same thing about the Jameson.
I think the price points have kind of reflected the demand in each country of their sort of whiskies and the competition that's there. So in Scotland, there's plenty of mature whiskey and there's a lot of competition. In Japan and Ireland, it's at the moment it's the other way around, really. In fact, there's competition to buy the liquid to put in your bottles in Ireland, so that's driving the price up before it even gets on the market. And the same thing's happening in Japan, where there's no mature whiskey, so anything with an age statement in Japan just the price goes up all the time.
No, definitely, and it's definitely an issue that's becoming more and more acute with the passage of time here in terms of Irish whiskey, which makes the Teeling Renaissance all the more interesting at €140 for an age statement like that. It's definitely, because you won't be seeing too many more third party bottled 18-year-olds coming in at €140, so. Definitely. Will we come on to the Bowmore?
Yes, please.
And then we can, as you said, Al, we can come back and try them again side by side. So Al, you were gonna tell us a bit about the Bowmore as well, and Islay, single malt, obviously.
So obviously it's Islay, and everyone thinks about Islay, they think about smoke, but Bowmore is kind of in the middle ground, really, with smoke. It's not in your face, but it's there, and it's always there in the background. But they are kind of one of the oldest distilleries on the island, and over the years they've kind of gone from being hugely respected to okay, and then hugely respected again. And I think at the moment they're sort of coming back from a slight sort of slump maybe in the beginning of the century, where maybe quality went down a little bit. You hear people talking about the flavors of what was it, violet and lavender and things like that in some of the bottlings around those times, where there was this real kind of strong soapy floral character, which kind of put a lot of people off. But they seem to have knocked that on the head, whatever was causing that. And now I think it's back in sort of form again. 18-year-old, it's 43%, predominantly sherry casks of some kind, most likely a mix of Oloroso and PX. Now we kind of mentioned earlier on, we're going to talk about colouring, and they do use caramel colouring in Bowmore, and that's another kind of sticking point. They get a bit of a slagging, certainly for the younger whiskies, where their 12-year-olds wouldn't look too different to that, and that's obviously got a lot of colour. Now, I'd say with the 18-year-old, it's probably mostly natural, especially if it is, PX and Oloroso casks. But I wouldn't let the colour put you off. I don't think it's a deal breaker for me, but it's nice to know what it should look like if we ever got the chance. But we'll have a sniff anyway. Really to say there's none of that.
Sorry, you were saying?
Go on.
No, I was going to say, because Niall in the chat says McDonald's barbecue sauce, and I was going to say you definitely get that, which is, I hate using the really cliched ones, but smoky bacon, kind of potatoes, that kind of flavor comes through. I often, obviously, if you take out the sherry component, in terms of the level of peat, comparing it to other whiskies, I often would say to people in the bar that it's more like about 15, 20 ppm, like a Connemara would be than a Lefroy or whatever, in terms of how much smoke to expect.
A lot of the time I prefer whiskies like this with only medium smoke rather than a full on peat bonfire of smoke. But it's nice in this one. Sort of leathery notes and something like old books or sort of walking into an old library, that kind of thing. Obviously some raisins and dates and dried fruits.
We've got some phenomenal tasting notes coming in here into the chat. Mark says meaty, ragu almost. Adam says it's like walking in a heather field while having a smoke and eating sorry, the thing moved on me there, and eating dark chocolate. Sean Kennedy says, I believe it's more of a Super Quinn pick and mix smoked cheese. Sherry Sackhoff says honey, salt with dark fruits and some peat notes, but not dominant. But everyone's going to hate me for this, but my personal favorites are smoked spiced rums. So Bowmore is my favorite here. I don't know why we'd hate you for that. That's perfectly fine amongst us. It's a very safe zone here. And Louis says, how close is this to a Scotch? I don't know if you want to answer that question now. How close is this to a Scotch? But unless I misread that. But exactly. Oh. Yeah, this is a Scotch. Brendan says, I get the smell of cap guns. That's a brilliant tasting.
Oh yeah.
So, when you're a kid and you're feeding them in through the gun. That is brilliant.
Now, normally you would associate that with sulfur, but I don't get sulfur, but I do get that cap gun thing. It's almost like it's almost like a very faint sort of roasted garlic or something like that.
Yeah. No, I can see that. Definitely. A faint roasted garlic.
Yeah, we need to taste this. We need to have a little sniff. Full body, but it's silky smooth in the mouth.
I'm a big fan of that. Yeah. I'm lost for words a bit. Paul in the chat says, am I on my own? Definitely fifth place. But look, I don't think you're probably not on your own, Paul, in terms of as we touched on earlier on, peat can be quite divisive. people, not everyone loves it. So it's totally fine to not feel like you're missing something if you're not totally in sync with that. But Brendan says that's my jam, and now it says fantastic on the palate. No, it's interesting. What do you think, Thomas?
Well, initially I was a bit let down at the start of the palate, and then it kind of comes on mid palate, and then a long finish. But no, I really like it. It's at 43%, so I'd kind of like to see it a little bit higher maybe, but that could be personal preference, I suppose. It's spoiled with cask strength whiskey, so yeah. But
I'd like to try
I do
it.
pick up all the notes that you said. The 46 exactly, yeah. And yeah, it's a shame about the color, but as you said, I don't think it would be too much different to that. Which, be shame we like to see it at natural color. I do believe Bowmore have an edition called The Darkest. Was a 15-year-old, which it was quite humorous to be fair. If they're gonna add a touch of coloring, but sure, Bowmore is absolutely fantastic. I like the fact that they're not just using peat, they're not just using sherry, they're like a mix of both.
Yeah,
I won a cocktail competition. Sorry, I won a cocktail competition years ago, 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, with by Beam Suntory, and the prize was one of the prizes was a bottle of the Bowmore. I think it was the Darkest. It didn't last long anyway. In the house, but stunning drop. There's some great comments coming in here. Smoothest, yes. Sitting out after a barbecue, one of those. Grabbing the ribs you don't need, and grabbing the ribs that you don't need after would be nice. Third or fourth place for me, but I'm not normally a Scotch fan, so I'm surprised I'm placing it there, says Noreen. So I don't know if you'll be joining us for the heavily peated tasting coming up, Noreen. Max says, I've had the second after the Teelings, delicious. You'd have that second after the Teelings. Do you need to educate your palate to build up to flavors like this, says Connor? That's a really good question, Connor. What do you think, gentlemen?
I don't think so. I'm just thinking back to the first whiskey tasting I ever went to, which was like a long time ago. But that was with Diageo when they had their classic malt series. To let you know how long ago it was basically the launch of their classic malt series. And they obviously in that range, they have Lagavulin and Talisker, and they were going through the range moving up to them, and they were like, oh, you guys, you don't know whiskey, you're going to like Glenkinchie and Dalwhinnie more than these because you don't know anything about whiskey. And pretty much everyone in the room liked Talisker and Lagavulin above everything else. So I wouldn't say so. I don't think it's something you move up to, but yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Thomas?
No, I was one of the anomalies that I dove straight into Lefroy 10 and loved it.
Yeah.
Then I tried it with my girlfriend. She dove straight in. She loved it. So it's not necessarily a graduation thing, but I do understand that people want something slightly smoked, be it the likes of a Bowmore or an Oban 14, say, and to kind of graduate to a Lefroy 10 or an Arbe 10. But no, it completely depends person to person.
Yeah. I think people are sensitive to different flavors as well. When you have sulfur in whiskey, you have some people who can detect it from a mile away, and other people like, oh, tastes fine to me. And I think smoke is in that sort of sensory area, or similar sort of area to sulfur, where maybe people are oversensitive to it, and that kind of turns them off. If that's all they're getting from the whiskey when they taste it is smoke, then I can understand why they wouldn't like that.
I think it also has to do with the ability of your subconscious, your brain, to place what peat smoke is. Because I mean, like I remember when I first ever tried a peat whiskey, I fell in love with it. But I've said this a few times in chats that it always reminds me, like my grandparents, rural Kerry out in Templenoe, had a stove that heated the whole house, and it was ran with a turf fire that we cut in the bog every summer. It's every cliche, but that's what it was. And when my nana would come over to our house, her clothes would stink of turf. Hugging my nana as a child, that visiting my grandparents, that's the peat smoke. No matter how many times I go at a peat whiskey again and again, I'm always taken back to those memories. So there is always something quite emotive when you're drinking whiskey. But also, when I was doing the whiskey classes in the Irish whiskey experience, the peat would divide opinion at the end. Everyone would be like, oh, I don't know if I like this, and da da da. But we did a tasting with Steve McGuinness for, I think it was Brooklyn. No, I can't remember what it was actually. It was a peated whiskey in the tasting anyway. And he bought down a bag of peated barley. And for a few, he left it in the bar. So for a few tastings after that, people who didn't like peated whiskey, I'd get them to eat some peated barley, and then try the peated whiskey afterwards. And straight away, people not necessarily loved, but they totally got the peated whiskey, because it's almost like their brain was able to make the connection. This smoky bit of barley that's quite chocolatey and weird is where this flavor is coming from. It's like all the associations in your brain that might be ashtrays or weird open fires become, no, this is a tangible thing that I now can draw. I know maybe that's a stupid thing to say, but I definitely think that how your brain can place peat on the palate has a huge amount to do with it. That's why some people taste it and they go heather and charcoal and seaweed, and others taste it and they go ashtray, you know. So yeah, I don't know. The Kevin says, great stuff, medium smoke and lovely balance. Artificial coloring offends me, but I forgive it here. I like that it's not overly smoky. It's like being able to taste Isla underneath all the smoke. John Doyle says, barbecue turkey for me, almost Denny's barbecue series. Mark Boy says, had an Octomore before, amazed how many other flavors come through. A lot of depth and peat. Sean says, Abelauer 16 is a great smoky. Not sure how available it is currently. I actually wasn't aware Abelauer did a smoky one, but there you go. That shows my ignorance. Good shout. The nose knows it's something, but brain struggles to differentiate specificity. I'm always going, oh yeah. Tony Ryan, Pete Nose often reminds me of opening a silage pit, but in a good way. And then Kev Darcy says hashtag turf life. So there you go. Some great comments there. Do you have any other thoughts on this, lads?
I was just a big fan, if I'm honest. Bowmore 12 I liked. Didn't love. I'd love to revisit now that I've tried the 18. But now I'm genuinely very impressed. I do like the balance of the sherry and the smoke. It's not just, smoke, which is good, because I do love the likes of an Octomore 8.3, Port Charlotte 10 and things like that. But this is far more gentle and much more approachable, I think, if someone does want to get into the peated side of Scotch.
I wish more people made whiskey like this in Scotland, covering that middle ground. That there's not many around anymore doing sort of medium or sort of light to medium peat. It's kind of my favorite style, I think. Springbank comes to mind.
Kilcoman has some offerings that aren't as heavy. If memory serves me right.
Ben Romack as well. Their whiskies are excellent.
Yeah, no, but Ben Romack, definitely. We have a phenomenal section of Ben Romack in the bar, and there's a couple of 18-year-old PX cask, and there's the 22-year-old Sauternes cask that are just out of this world. Ben Riach as well have some lightly peated ones. No, you're right. It would be nice.
Actually. The Ben Riach. This Ben Riach Smoky 12 is amazing.
Yeah. And Sutton have some lighter peated ones in their range as well, if I'm not mistaken. But they don't call it, what do they call it?
Kubacon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There you go. But you're right.
That's pretty smoky though.
Sorry?
Fairly, yeah.
That's pretty smoky. Kubacon.
No, you're yeah. There's so many out there. It's hard to remember which goes with which. But yeah. No, you're right. Sure. That one is more on the smoky side.
I'd advise everyone to clean out their glass with a bit of water if they're using the same glass, if they're going back to taste anything else, because you're only going to get smoke unless you clean it out.
True.
Chris Bly says, looking forward to tasting the Jamie again after this turf liqueur, or turf liquor, whichever. Brendan Power says, I don't mind if you tan your whiskey, just put it on the bottle, please. So obviously in Germany, that's the law, which is why you see the Mit Furbisher or whatever it says on the
it's Farbstoff,
Farbstoff. I don't know. I'm 5 whiskeys in, and I'm never good at languages when I'm sober. So, Yeah, so let's try that again. So, and while we're doing that, if we want to get, for the last 5-10 minutes on the chat, if people do want to have a sip of, if they have any left, and let us know in the chat what they like best. If you have drank it all, let us know either way. Let us know what you think the lineup was. Before we go back and taste it, do you have any initial thoughts, lads? In terms of takeaways before you go back and try it again and maybe have your mind changed?
Well, I think most people were a bit disappointed in the Kurioshi, so that's my main takeaway from tonight after the first tasting. But the Teeling was maybe the big surprise for me in just how good it was. I knew it would be good, but I think it's between that, the Glengoyne, and the Bowmore for me as a Scot. Yeah. But I'm retrying the Jameson here, so I'll see what I think of that again.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to try the Jameson now that we've gone into single malts, higher ABVs, and to see just how approachable it is after that kind of thing. But no, I knew the Teeling would be good. It was better than expected. I really like the Glengoyne, and the Bowmore was a big shocker as well. So it'd be nice to revisit a little bit each as we go and see do we still feel the same way. So that's not it.
And as we launch into the Jameson there, I do think it's important to note, if I'm not mistaken, the Bowmore is 104 euros. Now it's coming up as sold out on our website. So myself and Thomas will confirm tomorrow what the story with that is, if anyone's looking to pick up a bottle. But if that's that's a phenomenal price for compared to what we were talking about moving up and down the price ranges, and we moved down up until we got to the Kurioshi, and then we've got the lowest one there, the Bowmore at the end. So if you like the peat, that has to be factored in. Exactly. two for the price of a Jameson. I'd say if you went into the shop, the lads would give you 2 for 200 euros. But you didn't hear it from me. John Howley's come in and said he said Teeling first, Glengoyne second, Kurioshi fourth, Bowmore fourth. Sorry. First Teeling, second Glengoyne, third Kurioshi, fourth Bowmore, second fourth Jameson. Need them all in the collection. So I'm misreading that, but that's he's clearly obviously like the Teeling, which I tend to lean on at the moment. Sean says 50% Kurioshi came out of nowhere, didn't feel it at all. It felt it was the least percentage. I must say I didn't feel the 50. I don't know about least percentage, but you're right. It didn't seem like it was 50%.
Yeah.
Noreen says feelings, Jameson and Glengoyne, Bowmore, Kurioshi. And Mark Boyce says the feelings is fantastic. It's funny that people are saying, I'm sure it's a spell, it's an autocorrect, but
not necessarily.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, feelings are important. The people do say though, like as in the bar, we're always like, what's that song? Is the Black Eyed Peas like, ooh, I got a Teeling, yeah. I don't know, who's that? I can't remember. Thomas Collins says, what's the price in the Bowmore? So it's 104. Mark Boyce likes the Teeling. Noreen likes the Teelings. Stephen Hamilton says, Teeling number one. And getting a bottle before the price goes up. Colum says Teeling feelings here too. We got Teeling, Bowmore, Glengoyne, Jameson, then Kurioshi. Bowmore, Jameson. Interesting. Kevin's got the Jameson second. I think he's the first one to have the Jameson that high. We've got Bowmore, Teeling, Glengoyne, Jameson, Kurioshi. Great contrast. Big Scotch fan, but impressed by the Teelings. Sean Kennedy says, bring back Cooley, it seems. Niall says, Cooley's not got anywhere as far as I'm aware, but
still there.
Niall says, Teelings, Bowmore, Glengoyne, Jameson, and then Kurioshi. The Thomas says, Jamie is grand, but it's too safe for me. Love the Teelings. Mark Boyce says, Teelings, Bowmore, Jameson, Glengoyne, Kurioshi. Sean says, Glengoyne. We've got Bowmore, Glengoyne. So it seems to be. Oh, Vitaly actually has the Kurioshi as his second favorite. Vitaly's a regular on the chats. He's always got a good bit of input. So that's really interesting that he's got it up there. The messages are flying in there. And it says 1 Teeling, 2 Glengoyne. Interesting. Connor says Teeling, Jameson, Glengoyne, Kurioshi, Bowmore. So I probably just most people are probably bored to death of me hearing repeating the whiskies over and over again. But it's good to get a good feel of people that. And it seems from I don't know. My initial takeaway from what people are saying in the chat there is, if you like peat smoke, the Bowmore is your favorite, and otherwise Teeling wins the day. So that's interesting. What are you thinking now? Going back to the Jameson, lads?
It seems nicer second time round to me, but I'm trying the Kuriyoshi now, which also seems nicer. So maybe 5 whiskeys in, everything tastes better.
That's the rule of the day.
What do you think about yourself, Thomas?
I still like the Jameson, I have to say. Yeah, the Jameson still gentle, but it definitely tasted a bit nicer. I don't know if that's just the mouth coating, even though even drinking water, I don't know if it's if you have to just drink 5 whiskeys to make it raise the level, I doubt it. But no, I think it was still fantastic, but it would be probably lower down on the 5 for me. I'm just trying a little bit of the Glengoyne again. Oh, that's fantastic.
No, it is. I just had a sip of it there again for the second time. It is great. Brendan Power says, I put a drop of Bowmore in the Teelings. Timor is my number 1. So there you go.
Wow. Master blender.
Yeah.
I wonder who's the first. Actually, the Teelings did have, was it Teeling 24 has a small bit of peat smoke. Is it from the maturation, or is it blended into the final product? But it has it's not a peated whiskey, but it has peated whiskey in it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I believe there's a drop in it. I'll maybe confirm that.
I'm not sure about the 24, but I know ones like the old 21 and some of the other ones were actually basically peated Bushmills whiskey. So yeah, I don't know what the story with the 24 was, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, maybe that's where the peat comes from. It's that smoky, even we got from the Celtcast the other night. Yeah, that kind of strange early 90s Bushmills peated whiskey.
It doesn't taste like anything else in the world.
No, it's amazing whiskey. Yeah. It really is. So, folks, is there anything else you want to bring into the chat before we start to wind down? Paul says, I noticed the presenters are smiling a lot more after 5 whiskeys. John says, keep going back to the Kuriyoshi. It's very nice. So John also with Vitaly is a fan of the Kuriyoshi. So
yeah, if anyone has any left, try it again. It became a bit more honeyed with a bit of time being open, I think, but it has its charms. Yeah, I think it's just been outshined by everything else here.
No, I just tried it again there, and it's actually not a bad whiskey. It's a really good whiskey. It's just, as you say, I think I wouldn't place it above anything else in the lineup. Maybe actually going back to it again, maybe a bit more than the Jameson, but I think that's also because after you've had 5 whiskeys, you notice the alcohol less on the Kuriyoshi, and you notice the lack of alcohol in the Jameson a bit more. Kevin says, any other 18s not covered tonight at a similar price point that you'd recommend? That's a fantastic question. What do you reckon, lads?
Yeah, I'm thinking. If you can find Glendronach.
Yeah, Glendronach
18-year-old.
Allardyce.
Yeah, big fan of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I stockpiled that when I heard, kind of various weird stories on the actual liquid that goes into Glendronach 18-year-old. At one point, it was significantly older than 18, so I had a stockpile of that I'm still working my way through, and that's fantastic. I think at the moment it is exactly 18 years old, but it's still a great whiskey.
Phenomenal.
And obviously, I actually can't think of much more.
Renaissance Series 2 was actually in stock, so there you go. And that's 160.
Great value. 18-year-old whiskey. I think the whiskey we've drank has gone to my head. I can't think of anything at the moment outside of that. There is Longrow 18. We had that on a tasting last year. That was one of the actually Longrow and Springbank
Yeah.
The higher age statements, one of them that we did last year, were just phenomenal drops of whiskey.
Difficult to get.
Tony Ryan has said in the Glendronach Allardyce, yeah, so that's that 18. It's absolutely fantastic. Julie mentioned Bunnahabhain 18-year-old last week. That
is a fantastic whiskey. The Bunnahabhain core range at the moment is outstanding. So 12, 18 and the 20, 25-year-olds, they're absolutely fantastic whiskies.
And Brendan said for Cullen 18-year-old is quite nice. And you're right, but I suppose the for Cullen, if my memory serves me correct, I don't have it in front of me, but the price is a bit of a jump up in price point. I think it's
it's 140 for Cullen 18.
Is it 140 for Cullen? In my head it was bigger than that. So actually I'll take back what I said.
Elements, the limited edition is 180. Which is phenomenal. Yeah, that's what I go for on sale for sure.
The 5 Elements is amazing.
18, we have a couple of as well in store. Very little.
Adam says Glenfarclas 17 and 21 are up there,
like the Glengoyne, really. Glenfarclas, in the same sort of ballpark in terms of flavour.
You can get Glenfarclas 25 for a similar price to some of the 18-year-olds we've tried tonight, I think, if I'm not mistaken, which is a really good drop of whiskey. I would definitely recommend it. The Glenfarclas 25 is 159 euros. So, I mean, where would you be going? We had an amazing visit there a few years back. We got to try a whiskey from 1953 and a whiskey from 1955, which were unbelievable. John Howley says Old Putney 18-year-old. Yeah, actually, Old Putney is one that doesn't come up very often, but it's definitely a great whiskey. We did it in a Burns night tasting a number of years ago, and it went down an absolute treat. Louise Rooney says, where do you rate 15 Redbreast 15 and 21 compared to these? I'll leave that one to you, lads. Hi.
Very answer.
We had that question because we had Redbreast 12 on last week on the 12-year-old challenge, and one of the questions that came up was 15 versus 21 Redbreast, and it's one that divides opinion. Where do you fall down on that?
I would say the 21-year-old is fantastic. The 15-year-old recently has disappointed me when compared to, say, the 12-year-old cast strength. I think if you're torn between the 12-year-old cast strength and the 15-year-old, go for the cast strength rather than the 15. But if you have the money, go for the 21.
Yeah, I'd agree.
No, definitely. Well, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on tonight. It's your third or fourth time on, Al, but I think it's your first time on, Thomas, and it's been absolutely brilliant.
First ever, yeah.
So we must definitely come back on. Thank you for everyone who's stuck with our drunken ramblings at the end there, where we literally spent the last 10 minutes talking about nothing. But I appreciate that only 4 people have left the chat. Football. So yeah, and I think the people who once everyone stuck past the football chat, then that's great. I see that Edwin Poots has been left as leader as the DUP, so that's got to be one of the shortest political leaderships we've ever had on this island. So there you go. We'll all go find out after that. I found out about that after the tasting. Jesus, that whiskey has gone to my head. But, lads, thank you so much for joining, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We've a few more tastings live this week on the chat on the Celtic Whiskey Shop. So do check them out. There's a heavily peated one. There's another Celtic cask one. So definitely worth having a look at, especially if you like the Bowmore. Sean says bye Poots from Sean Boots. So there you go. Brilliant, lads. Thank you so much. And if there's anything we missed or didn't cover, I know there was a question there about Whiskey Live. Reply to the email on the Zoom, and myself and Julie will get back to you soon. So thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you all again soon. Cheers, lads.
Thanks, bye.